History of Ancient Egypt. When you hear ancient Egypt, you immediately think of pyramids, pharaohs, and mummies. But behind these familiar images lies another, lesser-known story. A story of intrigue, conspiracies, magic, vanished gods, cursed dynasties, and mysteries that scientists still cannot explain. Are you sure you know how the pyramids were built? But what if you were told that Cheops may have had doubles, hidden chambers, and secret signs discovered only in the 21st century? Do you think Nefertiti was just a beautiful wife? Perhaps she secretly ruled Egypt under a male name. And who really cursed Tutankhamun? And why did the Egyptians erase the names of their pharaohs from history, as if trying to erase them from reality itself? In this video, we have collected the most intriguing facts about ancient Egypt that are not taught in textbooks. You'll see how ordinary farmers turned into gods, how the afterlife governed the behavior of the living, and why even today, Egypt remains one of the most mystical corners of the planet. This is not just a short history. It is a reimagining of a great civilization that still speaks to us across the sands of time. Ready to dive in? Then buckle up. We are going on a journey through the ages, where history intertwines with mystery. The birth of ancient Egypt, from tribes to the first dynasty. The history of ancient Egypt begins long before the pharaohs, pyramids, and gold. Several thousand years before the construction of the great temples, scattered tribes lived on the banks of the Nile, engaged in hunting, fishing, and farming. They observed the Nile floods, studied the movement of the sun, and gradually nature began to turn into religion and seasonal cycles into the basis of the calendar and beliefs. Around 5,000 years BC, the first settled settlements appeared in the Nile Valley, where people began to build houses from adobe bricks, grow wheat, flax, and keep cattle. Even then, they had ritual burials in which the bodies of the deceased were curled up in the fetal position and placed together with tools, jewelry, and food. This speaks of belief in the afterlife, even before the appearance of the pharaohs. Around 3200 BC, something fateful happens. Egypt is divided into two kingdoms, Upper, in the south, in the area of Thebes, and Lower, in the north, in the Nile Delta. Each had its own symbols, deities, and kings. But one day, the king of Upper Egypt, named Menes, possibly a combined image of several rulers, does something incredible. He conquers Lower Egypt and unites the country. Thus begins the first dynasty, and with it, the official history of ancient Egypt. The country receives the capital Memphis, and from that moment on, two crowns are combined on the king's headdress, a white southern and a red northern. This is a symbol of the new order, strength, and centralized power. Menes is not just a warrior, he becomes a divine ruler, a living embodiment of Horus, and thus opens a tradition that will last for more than 3,000 years. From that moment on, Egyptian rulers cease to be just kings. They become demigods, whose will is not subject to doubt. The governance of Egypt is now not just politics. It is a ritual associated with maintaining the cosmic order of Ma'at, where every law, every harvest, and even the flooding of the Nile is a reflection of the correctness of the pharaoh's rule. The first dynasty laid the foundation of Egyptian civilization. Bureaucracy, the cult of death, the idea of divine power. It is from this moment that the path to the construction of pyramids, temples, and the creation of the greatest culture of the ancient world begins, whose secrets we still cannot fully unravel. The age of the pyramids, the architecture of immortality, and the secrets of the Old Kingdom. After the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, during the era of the Old Kingdom, c. 2700 to 2200 BC, Egypt experienced an incredible rise. This was the time when the power of the pharaoh became absolute, religion was strengthened, and architecture reached a scale that the world had never seen before. It was during this period that the Egyptians began to build the first pyramids, not just tombs, but the embodiment of the idea of eternity, a symbol of divine order and power. The first to make a real breakthrough was Pharaoh Djoser from the Third Dynasty. His vizier and high priest Imhotep was a genius who would later be spoken of as a demigod. It was he who designed the first pyramid in history, the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. This was no longer just a burial mound or a clay tomb. It was a stone structure 6 tiers high, reaching toward the sky. For the first time, architecture began to speak the language of divine exaltation. Other pharaohs followed Djoser. The golden age of the pyramids began in the 4th dynasty. The reign of Sneferu began, who built several pyramids at once, including the famous bent pyramid in Dashur, where architects experimented with form for the first time. But the real apogee came under his son, Khufu, Cheops. The Pyramid of Cheops in Giza is one of the 7 wonders of the world and the only one that has survived to this day. Almost 147 meters high, it consists of more than 2 million stone blocks, each weighing from 2 to 15 tons. How exactly it was built is still controversial. Some talk about ramps, others about internal spiral passages. There are even theories that the Egyptians possessed a lost technology that allowed them to move stone differently. But why all this? Why was it necessary to spend decades and the efforts of thousands of people to build a colossal tomb? The answer lies in the Egyptian worldview. The pharaoh is not just a man, he is a god, and his death is only a transition to another form of existence. The pyramid was not just a tomb, it is a mechanism of ascension, a ladder to heaven, a way to ensure immortality not only for oneself but for all of Egypt. Solar boats, temples, and cities of builders appear near the pyramids, indicating a complex organization of labor. The Great Sphinx is also erected here, keeping silence for millennia. Its true purpose and age are still controversial. Some believe that it is younger than the pyramids, while others believe that it is thousands of years older. The Old Kingdom is an era of great stability, centralized power, and cosmic ideology. But nothing lasts forever. At the end of the period, a crisis occurs, caused by droughts, power struggles, and depletion of resources. The pharaohs lose power, the country falls apart. The first transitional period begins, the era of turmoil. The Middle Kingdom, the resurgence of power and the priests who ruled in the shadows. After the collapse of the Old Kingdom, Egypt found itself in darkness. The first intermediate period, c. 2180 to 2050 BC, began, a time when centralized power disappeared. The country was divided among local rulers, and tombs were robbed like ordinary warehouses. The Nile floods became unpredictable, harvests were meager, and the people themselves began to doubt. Was the pharaoh really still divine if he could not maintain order? But in chaos, a new order is always born. Around 2050 BC, the ruler Mentuhotep II appeared in the south, in the city of Thebes, who began a war to unify the country. The victory became the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, a time of restoration, reforms, and subtle political games. The Middle Kingdom was different from the previous era. If previously the pharaoh was considered an unattainable god on earth, now he became a father ruler, caring for his subjects. Art became more humane. Texts about doubts, fears, the search for truth appeared in literature. For the first time, the Egyptians began to think about the soul, not as a part of the pharaoh, but as the inner voice of each. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom, especially those of the 12th dynasty, were not only military leaders, but also outstanding administrators. Senusert III subjugated Nubia, strengthened the southern borders, established trade with Punt, the Levant, and Asia. Egypt was again filled with gold, wood, lapis lazuli, and aromas. Temples were restored, pyramids were built again, albeit on a smaller scale than before. But it was at this time that the power of the priests increased. The temples of Amun, Ptah, and Osiris began to accumulate wealth and land. The priestly nobility becomes a new hidden force. The priests may not have been kings, but they controlled access to the gods, performed rituals, and controlled texts and prophecies. The formation of a spiritual aristocracy begins, which will play a decisive role in the life of the country in the future. A new spiritual focus also appears, the cult of Osiris, the god of the dead, the resurrected king who himself went through death. Now the afterlife becomes available not only to the pharaoh but also to ordinary people. This changes everything. Rituals, books of the dead, amulets, and funeral practices go beyond the palace and temples. Mysticism becomes part of everyday life. However, stability is not eternal. Towards the end of the Middle Kingdom, internal contradictions intensify. The country is again bursting at the seams. Next comes the second intermediate period, the time of the Hyksos invasion, foreign rulers from the north who brought horses, chariots, and fear. Egypt found itself under foreign rule for the first time in centuries. But it was from this disaster, that one of the most brilliant kingdoms in Egyptian history would arise. The New Kingdom, the age of empire, gods, and legendary rulers. After centuries of humiliation and chaos, Egypt rises with renewed vigor. Thebes rises again, and a dynasty emerges that not only returns Egyptian control of the country, but makes Egypt the military superpower of the ancient world. Thus begins the New Kingdom, c. 1550 to 1070 BC, the golden age of the pharaohs, when Egypt ruled lands from Nubia to Syria, built temples the size of cities, and rulers became not just kings, but living gods on earth. The Renaissance begins with Ahmose I, who expels the Hyksos, a mysterious people who brought chariots, a new type of bow, and the fear of a foreign army to Egypt. But it is this shock that makes the Egyptians stronger. The army becomes a priority, and the pharaohs are not only priests but also commanders. The names that we know today enter the arena. One of them is Thutmose III, the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. He led dozens of military campaigns, extended Egypt's power to the Euphrates, and subjugated Canaan, Lebanon, and Nubia. Egypt became an empire for the first time. Columns of gold, slaves, rare goods, exotic animals, and timber for construction flowed from the conquered lands to Thebes. But even before him, Hatshepsut ruled. A woman who took the title of pharaoh, donned royal regalia, wore a false beard, and ruled Egypt better than many men. Her trading expedition to Punt brought unprecedented wealth to the country, and the temple at Deir el-Bahri is an architectural masterpiece that reflects her ambitions and mystical connection with the gods. Then comes Amenhotep IV, who will go down in history as Akhenaten. He challenges the priests, destroys the cult of Amun, and introduces the worship of a single god, Aton, the solar disk. This is the first case of monotheism in history, but political games are hidden behind the religious reform. Akhenaten builds a new capital, Akhetaten, and leads Egypt away from the old gods. But after his death, the priests return to the old order, and Akhenaten himself becomes an almost cursed name. He is replaced by the boy pharaoh Tutankhamun, whose tomb will explode the world of archaeology thousands of years later. Despite his short reign, it was his treasures, discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter, that will become an icon of ancient Egyptian culture. And then comes Ramses II, or Ramses the Great, a pharaoh whose name became synonymous with power. He built more than any other, concluded the first written peace treaty in history with the Hittites, had his face carved on the temples at Abu Simbel, and ruled for over 60 years. Many believe that he was the biblical pharaoh of the Exodus, a theory that still excites minds. But even great eras have an end. After the reign of Ramses, Egypt slowly begins to lose influence. The economy is exhausted, raids from the sea become more frequent, the priests become stronger again, and discontent grows among the people. The third intermediate period begins, and then the age of conquests. Egypt will be ruled by Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and finally the Romans. But even after thousands of years, the greatness of the New Kingdom is not forgotten. The temples of Luxor, the statues of Karnak, the colonnades of Abu Simbel, the inscriptions in the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, all these are not just stones, but the voice of an era that considered itself immortal. Decline, the Ptolemies, and the last queen. Egypt on the boundary of Eris. When does an empire die? Not with its last pharaoh or its last battle. Egypt died slowly, like a river growing shallow under the scorching sun. After the grandiose heyday of the New Kingdom, the country gradually lost its strength. Disunited rulers, internal strife, priests who were pulling power towards themselves, and endless wars weakened the state. By this time, Egypt had become a tasty morsel for anyone who dreamed of world hegemony. First came the Libyans and Nubians, then the Assyrians, whose armies burned cities. Then the Persians, and finally Alexander the Great, who entered Egypt without a fight in 332 BC. He was greeted not as a conqueror, but as a liberator and the Son of God. He founded Alexandria, a city that became a new center of knowledge and power, and left Egypt under the rule of his general, Ptolemy I. Thus begins the era of Hellenistic Egypt. The Ptolemies are a dynasty of Greeks that rule Egypt for almost 3 centuries. They adopt the titles of pharaohs, observe religious rituals, build temples and tombs in the Egyptian style, but speak Greek, rely on the elite from Macedonia, and create a dual world of 2 cultures. This is a time of great confusion. Greek philosophy combines with Egyptian magic, science flourishes, a great library appears in Alexandria, and the city becomes the intellectual capital of the ancient world. However, the power of the Ptolemies weakens, and Egypt is increasingly drawn into the orbit of the Roman Republic. And then the last, and perhaps the most famous queen of Egypt appears, Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra was not just a symbol of beauty, she was a strategist, politician, diplomat. She spoke several languages, negotiated with Caesar, Mark Antony, managed the economy and the fleet. She fought not for the throne, but for the independence of Egypt, trying to keep the country in a world where everything was decided by the Roman legions. But the outcome was predetermined. After the defeat at the Battle of Actium and the suicide of Cleopatra in 30 BC, Egypt became a Roman province. At that moment, the 3,000-year history of pharaohs, gods, and a great civilization ended. But a new one began, a legend that survived for millennia. Ancient Egypt did not disappear. It absorbed the conquerors, left a mark on religion, culture, architecture. Its hieroglyphs were silent until the 19th century, when Jean-François Champollion deciphered the Rosetta Stone. Its gods inspire artists, its pyramids, engineers, and its magic still excites minds. And perhaps the greatest secret of Egypt is not in gold, not in mummies, not in curses, but in the fact that it has survived everything and remained eternal. Thank you for being on this journey through the millennia. If you want to learn more about forgotten civilizations, myths, and mysteries of the past, stay with us. There are even more secrets ahead.